Several years ago, I unintentionally founded the village we named Circumstances, which remained unincorporated. Since then, it has grown to a population of 349. I had a stroke of luck. After dropping off another trailer load of brand name bandages in Texas, which needed sterilizing before hitting the retail shelves, I called in to confirm I was clear. Dispatch then gave me a pickup order that allowed me to return home 2 days ahead of schedule. Thanks to my hazardous materials license, I was one of the few capable of handling the job. The pickup location was just a half-hour drive away, so I set off, refueling along the way. Once loaded, I immediately hit the road again. The drop-off point only an hour from home. While driving, I double-checked that the entire load was secure. This haul paid twice the usual rate. Instead of sticking to the prescribed route, I opted to take a shortcut across the countryside, reducing both mileage and travel time. This decision put me less than 2 hours away from home, putting me ahead by 5 to 6 hours. Approaching an intersection of two rural roads, I noticed a handwritten sign indicating property for sale before county acquisition. Following the arrow to the right, I followed two more signs leading into a farmer's yard. They were an elderly couple who had retired due to their age, probably in their early 70s. Their land, leased to local farmers, fell behind on taxes due to rising prices. They loved their farm and weren't ready to sell and move to town, so they had to sell some of their land. I called my dad, who stepped in. Using our family trust, we bought the farm at a fair price and let them rent the house long-term at a low rate. They were thrilled and offered to help me in the future if I needed anything. I asked my dad to carve out and separate 10 acres at the intersection of the original 200-acre farm. It was an ideal spot to build a convenience store and gas station since the nearest major town was an hour away. Once I left, I suggested to my dad that he visit and try to buy the surrounding land around the intersection as cheaply as possible. He did, and somehow we ended up with 10 acres on each corner of the intersection. While searching for water, my father discovered an underground river running through the farm that could easily supply water for 50,000 people. He decided to tap into it to support our new business venture. Just as I arrived to make the delivery, dispatch called with another rush job, which I happily took. Luckily, I made it home at my usual time, 6 months later. I dropped off the load at 5 in the morning that Wednesday, a whole 12 hours ahead of schedule. After parking the truck and trailer in the company yard, I picked up the keys to my freshly painted old Ford truck from the dispatch office. I knew I would likely face scrutiny for breaking state and federal driving hour laws soon. Due to a breakdown, I had been on the road for 16 days straight. That's why I pushed hard to get home. This meant the person replacing me would enjoy an extra 2 days off. The cab was scheduled for inspection and would soon be ready for use, after ensuring it was properly repaired. The replacement driver would be informed to come in. He'd be on the road by 9 o'clock. I had promised my wife I'd be home in time for dinner tonight. Marcy had taken care of the children and was eagerly awaiting my return. A while back, I had pulled the engine out of the old Ford truck since it was dead. I worked on restoring the frame and body during my spare time as the interior was still in good shape. Before embarking on my last 2-week run, I prepaid a local paint shop to repaint every piece of metal, inside and out. Once they finished reassembling the interior, Jameson's Auto was supposed to pick it up. After installing the new engine and double-checking everything, Jameson left the truck keys with the dispatcher, knowing I'd settle up upon my return. The fresh paint job made the old truck look brand new. It had been transformed from its original red to a sleek midnight black, with new chrome bumpers. The word Ford was painted in white on the tailgate, just like it was originally. Now I could even get collector plates for it if I wanted. Arriving home 10 hours early, I thought it would be a pleasant surprise for my wife. She didn't start work until 9, so I started up the truck and headed home, eagerly anticipating seeing my wife and our 2 daughters after being on the road for 16 days. It was around 8 in the morning when I drove down our street toward our house, only to find a vehicle parked in our driveway that didn't belong there. I immediately recognized whose vehicle it was. It belonged to the youngest son of the owner of our transportation company, his pride and joy. While I was on the road, he had time off since we shared the same company cab. In many ways, we were complete opposites. He had a reputation as the family's troublemaker and was known among truckers for being loud and boastful. I pulled over to the side of the road and observed, trying to figure out why he was at our house and where my wife's car was. My heart sank as I saw my wife Marcy and Jack Redding coming out of the house with our 2 children ahead of them. Jack was holding a rig bag in his right hand, the kind U.S. drivers always carry with essentials for the road. The girls had missed their school bus, so Marcy and Jack were taking them to drop them off. I recorded a video of them using my cell phone. I caught Marcy and Jack sharing a tender moment behind the kids before they loaded them into the car. It was clear that whatever was going on had been happening for a while. Marcy and Jack didn't seem concerned about being seen in public together. They appeared like any other happy family. They drove right past me without recognizing my restored truck, and since I wasn't expected home, Marcy wasn't looking out for me. I watched them in my rearview mirror as they turned the corner. I pulled into our 3-bedroom house and prepared to investigate further. I checked our 2 kids' rooms and they looked normal, just like always. Our master bedroom was the same. My wife's clothes were where they should be, and so were mine. Even the bed was made, which was unusual since the kids had missed the bus. Everything seemed normal so far. If they had spent the night together, I wondered where the evidence would be. If they weren't involved, why was he here? I searched through everything twice, but my instinct told me to keep looking. Nothing seemed out of place from the basement up. The dishwasher was full and needed to be run. That's when I noticed a bit of light under the door leading to the unfinished 3rd floor. It struck me as odd because that shouldn't happen. We had hung old curtains and kept them closed, treating it like an attic for things we no longer used. I hadn't been up there in years. My first thought was, Marcy must have been up there and forgot to turn off the light. Curiosity got the better of me. I had to find out why there was light under that door. I climbed the stairs and opened it, only to find the entire floor completely finished. I was shocked. The morning light was coming through because someone had left a curtain open, something we never did when I was home. The problem was this floor wasn't supposed to be worked on. Marcy and I couldn't agree on what to do with it, which is why it hadn't been touched. Now I wondered who finished it and why. It had its own large master bedroom, bigger than ours downstairs, with huge walk-in closets on both sides of the master bathroom. There was even a separate sitting area with its own TV and DVD player. On a small table, I found XXX movies that my wife would never watch or let me watch. When I turned on the TV and pressed play on the DVD remote, an adult video started playing. It was clear someone had been watching it. I was shocked to see it was a homemade video of my wife doing BJ to someone. It saddened me because she never did that for me. I was surprised to see how much she seemed to enjoy it. When I suggested trying it, she said it was disgusting. Across the room, there was a handmade card on the coffee table that said, "We love you, Uncle Jake," signed by my kids. I felt sick to my stomach. My worst fear was now a reality. Not only was he my wife's lover, but it seemed they were trying to take my kids away from me. The king-size bed had been slept in and not made. There were new baby dolls on the floor that I had never seen before, indicating she had been in a rush this morning. The bedroom smelled of closeness. Checking the walk-in closets, I found one side filled with clothes that must belong to him. They were too big for me. The other side had more of her clothes, including sensual evening wear she had never worn for me. I no longer had any doubt. Marcy and Jack were lovers. I was starting to realize there was another side to her that she kept hidden from me. It was clear that I had always been her second choice. What did my children know about all this? I used my cell phone to record everything I found. I made sure to hold up one of his shirts, showing how it was too big for me in the mirror to prove it was his. A framed picture of him with his parents caught my attention, and I recorded every detail of the room before stopping and saving the video. I watched the TV again and rewound the disc. Marcy appeared to enjoy being controlled like the video proved she was. I captured the moment when the camera moved up to show the man's pleasure in his eyes. It was Jack Redding, my boss's son. This was the second clip I saved. I figured I now had all the evidence I needed. I went down to the basement, grabbed our 3-piece luggage set, and packed all my clothes. As an afterthought, I returned to the 3rd floor to remove the disc with their homemade SXXX video recorded on it. I packed it into one of the suitcases and left them by the front door. I would come back for them later. There were more important things I needed to do. I called my father and asked how soon we could open the new store. He said construction was already underway, including a second story for a 3-bedroom apartment. "I'm looking for a regional manager to oversee everything," he added. "The chain we're working with has granted us a franchise, which will really boost us. It will take another month and a half for construction to be completed, and another month after that to get everything set up." "Why?" he asked. "I'll be running it, Dad, and living in the apartment," I replied. "Find me a good civil attorney and a divorce attorney. I'll fill you in on the details later." I called the farmer from whom we bought the farm and asked if I could rent a room from him until the construction was finished. He agreed to let me stay, but he said, "Your money isn't good enough." No matter how hard I tried, he wouldn't take any money because he felt he and his wife owed my family a lot. I told him I'd come by sometime the next day. By 10 in the morning, I was at the transportation center, sitting in the boss's office, informing him I was quitting without giving the usual notice. Naturally, he asked why, and I really didn't enjoy having to explain. I showed him the video of the room and then the pictures I'd taken afterward. The last one was of the framed photo of him, his wife, and their son. "Where did you get that?" Jace asked. I explained that it was from the third floor of my house, which wasn't supposed to be finished. His face turned as white as fresh-fallen snow. Then I showed him the clip of what his son Jack having closeness with the woman in the mouth. Jace, a Christian man, watched it and said, "My God, that's appalling." I explained, "The woman your son Jack is with in the video is Marcy, my wife. That's why I'm leaving her. This video was made in a separate room on the third floor with someone else's help." Confused and unsure, I added, "I'm sorry, but because of what your son and my wife did, I have no choice but to quit my job if I want a chance to get custody of my 2 daughters in the divorce." Jace immediately called the accountant to issue my final paycheck and included a bonus of $10,000 because of his son's actions. He told me to keep quiet and come to his office as soon as possible. "Are the children his or yours?" Jace Redding asked seriously. "They both look like Marcy, so I believe they are mine. I don't think this affair has been going on for long," I replied. "We've been hearing rumors for a long time, Heath," Jace Redding said somberly. "The only way to know for sure is to have a DNA test done." "I suggest you have Jack request it," I said sadly. "Please don't say anything to anyone. I want Marcy to find out on her own tonight that I know what's been going on. Just so you know, Heath Cummings, I don't approve of my son's actions. When he returns in 2 weeks, he's gone. We've heard rumors for years that he was involved with a married woman, doing things behind her husband's back. But we never had proof. We just thought he was bragging to other drivers," Jace said solemnly. "I'm deeply sorry this happened to you. A good man. I had no idea he had moved into your house," he continued. "Both of your jobs made it easy for this to happen without anyone knowing." I later found out that Jace kept his promise. Not only did he fire his son, but he also disinherited him because he had brought disgrace to the family name by ruining another man's marriage. What Jace couldn't get past was that it happened to one of his trusted longtime employees. To him, it showed that his own son didn't care about anything or anyone. After depositing the check, closing all our joint accounts, and settling my bill at Jameson's auto shop, I went to my children's elementary school. I spoke at length with the guidance counselor before they called my children out of class to talk with me. When she started to leave for privacy, I suggested she stay. I didn't want to be accused of trying to influence our children. She asked if I was sure about that. I replied, "In this situation, yes, because my wife Marcy works as a social worker for the state." Miss Connor looked visibly shocked. I discovered that their new Uncle Jake had been renting the upstairs for 3 years. At first, he kept his distance, but over time he seemed to become part of the family. Marcy had introduced him as a distant cousin who had just returned to the area. Although they had never caught them together, the girls had seen Marcy coming downstairs so often in the morning that they assumed they were sleeping together. "Linda said Mom insisted we start calling him Uncle," my daughter explained. I told them plainly that he was no relation to either of us. My daughters looked shocked at this revelation. I told them that Jack had been their mother's long-term boyfriend, and because of this, we would be getting a divorce. Being a trucker, I knew it would be difficult to get primary custody, so they would have to stay with their mother until I found a new job and went to court to try to get sole custody. The school counselor confirmed what I explained was true. I kissed my daughters goodbye and watched them head back to their 6th grade class. She gave me her name and phone number. "Have your lawyer contact me so I can provide a statement about what I witnessed," she said. "I've seen too many men get unfairly treated in their divorces." I stopped by a flower shop and requested a bouquet of the most wilted flowers they had, asking them to package and box it. I had to explain it was meant as a joke before they agreed. One of the staff fetched some discarded flowers from the garbage. "Will these work?" she asked. I said they were perfect, and she boxed them up for me. Taking them back home, I laid the bouquet on our bed along with the card my daughters had signed for Uncle Jake and her baby doll that I'd cut up with her sewing scissors. I loaded the tools I wanted to keep into the back of my truck. After loading the suitcases, I covered everything with a tarp and secured it tightly. The tools were valuable. Our neighbor, a true friend named John Zecksmith, walked over and said, I guess you didn't know about Marcy's other husband, the way we were led to believe. Other husband? I asked. In a common law sense, John explained. No, I just found out today. This has been going on for at least 3 years. We used to work together. I quit my job today because I want sole custody of my daughters. I need to show the court that I'll be there for them every day, I explained before continuing. When I was driving, he wasn't around, so I had no way of knowing unless we were both home at the same time, I explained. He's the boss's youngest son. His father found out today when I walked in and quit without notice. We talked a bit more, and he suggested I move my truck from the driveway to his garage. He thought that by observing her tonight, I might get an idea of how to plan for what would happen next. You can get up before dawn and head out in the early morning darkness. I thought about it for a few minutes before agreeing. I'm glad I did. I watched as my wife of 13 years pulled into the driveway. It seemed her car had been at the shop for service. She went straight to the bedroom to change out of her work clothes. She was stopped in her tracks when she saw what was on our bed. Initially, she smiled, thinking it was a surprise gift from Jack. Through the binoculars, I zoomed in on the joyful smile on her face. She set aside the kid's card for Uncle Jake and reached for the baby doll, only to find it in pieces. It had been a favorite since she bought it for Jack, and she only wore it when she wanted him to take her seriously. Why would he do this? Now, concern began to show on her face. Why would Jack leave this in Heath's bedroom? I could see doubt crossing her mind. Brushing off the remaining flower pieces, she opened the box. The smell of 24 rotting red roses caught her off guard. For a moment, it seemed like she might be sick. I could tell she hadn't realized I had found out. Her puzzled look told me she didn't understand what Jack was trying to convey. Perhaps she thought Jack was ending their relationship. I watched as my 2 daughters got off the bus and walked toward the front door. Lauren texted me saying, "I'm calling you, but don't answer with your voice. We want you to hear what we say to Mom. We decided she needs to hear the truth, like you taught us." I explained to our neighbor John what was about to happen. "When I switch it to speaker, we need to stay quiet," I said, "so we can both listen." The girls headed straight to their mother's room, who was still trying to process what I had done. She still hadn't grasped the message I had sent. After greeting their mother as usual, my daughters began to speak. "Dad called us out of class today because he wanted to talk to us privately," Linda began. I could tell by her expression that my daughter had caught their mother's attention. "We went to the school counselor's office. We were confused why he was there. You said he'd be home around 6. Then he asked Miss Connor to stay," Lauren added. "The first thing he asked us was who Uncle Jack is and how long he's been living with us. I told him he's a distant cousin of yours who moved back to the area," Linda explained. Fear appeared on Marcy's face. Now she knew who had left the message on the bed. "Dad had no idea you had finished the 3rd floor while he was on the road. You told us it was a surprise for him," Lauren revealed. "Now we know it wasn't. We kept our promise to keep your secret, and boy was Dad surprised," Linda added. "He said he didn't find out it was finished until today," Lauren said. "Mom, you taught us not to lie, but I guess we've learned that it's okay for you to lie to everyone in the family." Marcy started crying, tears flowing freely. "Dad didn't know Uncle Jack had been renting the 3rd floor from us for over 3 years, Linda stated. "We had to explain that while he was on the road, you never slept in the bed that you and Dad shared when he was home." "We knew because it was never made up before you left for work," Lauren pointed out. Marcy turned pale. Her own daughters had exposed her because of her actions. Even something as simple as an unmade bed was bringing her down. She had always insisted that the girls make their beds before starting their day. "We told Dad we never actually caught you with Uncle Jack, but we did see you coming downstairs regularly from the 3rd floor in the mornings when he wasn't home," Lauren explained. "Dad said he's divorcing you because Jack isn't a relative. He's your long-term lover, hidden from me by Mom. Dad said Mom used me for a long time to support him and her lifestyle, not for our family's benefit. It means my life with her has been a lie. He said we have to stay with you until he finds a new job. He's starting to look for work now because he quit today to try to get custody of us," Linda added. Miss Connor later explained that Dad had to quit because the court wouldn't give custody to a long-distance truck driver. "After saying goodbye, we went back to class," Linda continued. Marcy sat on the bed crying, trying to keep herself together. She knew what her daughters said was true. Heath was doing the right thing by preparing for the battle ahead. Being a social worker, she understood what the state would consider during their evaluation for the court. "We broke down so the school counselor had to take us out of class for the rest of the day," Linda said. "We had a long talk about everything as she tried to calm us down. We learned that cheating on your spouse is adultery, Mom, Lauren said. Miss Connor told us it's the worst betrayal a married couple can commit. It seems like you're not bothered by it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Linda said. Miss Connor wondered why you thought you could get away with living with two men for so long. Marcy muttered to herself, I don't have two husbands, just Heath and a live-in lover. Then she saw it from another perspective and realized that's how most people would see it. Heath, driven by his pride, had no choice but to file for divorce. In his eyes, she had been using him and treating him like a fool. Linda and I talked a lot about you sleeping with another man, and we've concluded that you must not only hate Dad, but both of us too, because that's the only explanation for what you did and why you did it for so long, Lauren said. Miss Connor said no one who truly loved or respected our father would do what you did, Linda added. Marcy sobbed uncontrollably, her body shaking. She never expected to be caught or confronted by her daughters about it. Their words were harsh and cut deep, forcing them to grow up too soon because of her actions. Just before we got on the bus, Miss Connor asked if we were emotionally okay to ride home. She offered to drive us if we weren't. I told her we'd be fine because we needed to talk, Linda explained. Miss Connor said she'd testify about what she heard today if she's asked in court. She felt she had no choice because she's seen too many men destroyed by someone else's lies, Lauren added. We whispered a lot to each other on the bus ride home, and we've made some decisions, Linda stated. Marcy completely broke down, burying her head in her hands. Mom, we might only be 12, but soon we'll be old enough to choose who we want to live with. Miss Connor told us that at 13, we can decide for ourselves, and we choose Dad, Lauren declared firmly. We're going to call Grandma to come get us. I'm sure she'll let us stay with her and Grandpa until Dad figures things out. That way you and Jack can have the whole house to yourselves, Lauren said. Come on, sis, we need to call Grandma and pack some clothes. Mom, one last thing. Were you trying to get us close to Uncle Jake so we'd accept him as your second husband without Dad knowing? Linda asked. Because it really seems like that's what you were doing. Marcy was devastated. She sat there crying as her daughters went downstairs to call their grandmother, who lived across town. They had their father's keen insight. They looked at everything logically and drew their own conclusions. I texted Marcy. What you found on the bed was my doing. Let your live-in partner know I'll be suing him for child support for you and the kids. Through binoculars, I watched Marcy come to the realization that when I expose her relationships and lies in court, she'll lose all rights to her daughters. Marcy knew she was defeated. There was no happy ending here. Heath suing and exposing Jack would ruin them both. John and I timed it perfectly. Less than 15 minutes later, my in-laws showed up. John opened his front door just to hear if the voices were loud enough to carry. They were because they sounded like shouting. My mother-in-law was giving Marcy a piece of her mind as she led her granddaughters out of the front door. But it was my father-in-law who put everything in perspective, leaving no doubt about how he felt about his daughter's situation. I suppose once you've driven Heath out of your life and settled things with Jack, you'll be looking for another long-distance driver to replace Heath, my father-in-law angrily remarked. Jack has already shown how little he thinks of you by accepting that you share yourself with others. Your actions have made it clear that one man will never satisfy your desires. John and I could see that Marcy was devastated by her father's words. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. We'll contact Child Services tomorrow to see how to handle this situation, Marcy's mother declared. After all, it was our granddaughters who reached out to us and explained why they wanted out of this house. They've made me very proud. Someone clearly raised them right, and sadly we can't say it was you. John closed the door, walked into the kitchen, and grabbed a couple of cold beers. I followed him. Your daughters saw through the situation correctly, Heath. You should be proud, John said. To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Marcy told us you needed money and were going to rent out the third floor. The house and land were fully paid off. We were just taking our time with it because we didn't need the income, I explained. I remodeled the entire house from the ground up. So she's been lying to us from the beginning. Jack and she had it all planned out. Where did the money come from then? John asked. We haven't received a single cent in rent from that supposed rental suite since day one, I stated. I assume it came from Jack's trust fund and he's paid it back. I took out my cell phone, selected Marcy's name from my contacts, and sent a text. John, let me know if you spot Marcy. I need to be told her response. A couple of minutes later, he said, Got her. She's back in her bedroom and seems to have calmed down. I sent it. It was brief. The message said, Hey, 403. To all who come calling, Jace Redding and I both want to know because of the long-term relationship with his son. Are Linda and Lauren mine or Jack's? Jace is going to file a lawsuit to try to find out. Oh my God, she's lost it. She threw her phone at the wall, John exclaimed. Now she's lying face down on her bed, crying hysterically. John returned to the kitchen and grinned. What did you text her? I simply asked if Linda and Lauren were Jack's or mine, I replied. Jace mentioned he'd heard rumors for years about his son's affair with a married woman whose husband was unaware. So I posed a question that needs clarification for everyone involved. John Smith's face went pale. He understood the seriousness of the Redding family's reputation. Jace was willing to go all the way to the Supreme Court to uncover the truth. I waited half an hour and asked John to check on Marcy again. She was sitting on the living room sofa. I sent her the 5-minute clip of her doing BJ that I had recorded from the TV, revealing the man she was servicing was Uncle Jack. I added the question of who filmed it. After a moment, I texted that I had taken the disc and might find out when I watched it. Marcy's lost it again, John said. I don't want details, but she vomited all over the living room rug. I left at 5 in the morning after sending what I had recorded the day before to everyone we knew, whether friend or foe. Accompanying the text was, "This is what I showed to Jace Redding when he asked why I had to quit." The second video was also filmed on the same floor as the bedroom with someone else's help. Neighbors openly say Jack Redding is Marcy's second husband. Marcy had told neighbors I agreed to the arrangement. That's not true. I found out yesterday, and I'm planning to file for divorce and sue Jack Redding for several reasons. For most people, it wasn't going to be a good start to their day. I stopped at the friendly truck stop just on the edge of town and ordered myself a trucker's breakfast. I parked my truck so I could see it from my booth window as I ate. I'm sorry, Heath. No man deserves what happened to you, Maureen, Marcy's younger sister, said. Mind if I join you? I nodded, so she sat down across from me. I sipped my hot coffee slowly. Mom and Dad told me last night. The girls spilled everything as soon as they got home. We've all been blindsided by this, Maureen explained. Please, if you change your phone number, let us know. We won't give it to Marcy. The number will stay the same, Maureen, I assured her. I was planning to quit in 2 months anyway because my girls are growing up and I wanted to be home at night when they start their active teenage years. What was my sister thinking? Maureen muttered. There's no way you would ever go along with Marcy having a second husband. I don't think we'll ever know, I replied. Maybe it started as a harmless friendship, but it escalated into something it shouldn't have. Either way, she seemed to be enjoying it, from what I can tell. Apparently, it's been going on much longer than the 3 years we found out about. What do you mean? Maureen asked. Jace Redding, when I explained why I was quitting, told me there were rumors that his youngest son had been involved with a married woman for years, I explained. He asked if Linda and Lauren were Jack's. Oh, crap. Who else knows? She asked. I opened my text messages to Marcy and let her read what I sent her last night. Then I showed her what I sent out this morning. By the time she finished viewing, she had to wipe her tear-stained eyes. What she already knew was bad had just gotten a lot worse. The video showed their relationship involved another person. At the end of the day, everyone will find out, I said. Jace will make his search for the truth public. It might turn out that both girls are mine or both are Jack's, or maybe neither of us is their biological father. What's on my mind now is whether the person who made the video was male or female. Maureen must have seen the tears in my eyes because she got up and came over to sit beside me, holding my hand. We didn't say a word until the waitress took our order. Eventually, I had to let go of her hand so I could eat. Heath and Marcy had gotten married at 19. She was the youngest bridesmaid, and even then, she was smitten with him. She had thought he was handsome then, and still did. He drove a long-distance truck so Marcy could finish her university education. When she graduated and got a job with the state, she had her pick of locations, but chose one near her hometown. Now, Heath understood it was to be closer to her first love, Jack, whom their parents never approved of. Maureen looked at Heath and felt he couldn't handle knowing that right now. When Heath was home, Marcy spent as much free time with him as she could. He was an honest man who treated her as an equal. Whenever she had problems, he was the one she turned to. He taught her to consider things from all angles, making big problems seem small. Falling in love with him wasn't difficult for her, it felt genuine, setting a high standard for any man who courted her after. Her parents expected her to marry, but Maureen couldn't tell them she loved someone else, someone she always had. Heath was a loyal man who never looked at another woman. She needed to find a way to keep Heath in her life for now. When the time was right, she'd make her move and prove to him once and for all that he had married the wrong sister. Heath, do you know where you'll be staying? Maureen asked. Linda and Lauren asked Mom and Dad to take them in. They're angry, upset, and determined, but they're so proud of their father. The girls told Mom and Dad they want to tell the court. They prefer to live with you, she said. Mom and Dad explained to them that you're doing what's best for the long term. I can bring them to you on weekends so you can see them if you want. I pulled out my notes and gave her the address of the farm. My dad and I have begun building a gas station and convenience store near there. I'll be staying with the tenant on our farm, I explained. I'll need to check with them before I can give you an answer. We're adding a large 3-bedroom apartment above the store where I'll live. Why out there? Maureen asked. We own 10 acres on each side of the intersection that we plan to subdivide and sell as 3/4-acre lots once developed, I said. There's nothing else in the area, so the store will be convenient and attract customers. How did you come across it? Maureen asked. According to Google Maps, there's nothing nearby. I was taking a shortcut to save time, I explained. There was heavy traffic on the main road, and I spotted a sign at a 4-way stop, so I followed it. The traffic flow supports the business. After we finished eating, I paid the bill. Maureen leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, as she always did. It brought a smile to my face. Keep this in mind, Heath, Maureen said. There are many of us who have always loved you for the man you are. While driving, I called my father and explained everything. He promised to find me one of the best divorce lawyers available. I checked the mileage and found it was only 75 miles to my destination. I arrived at the construction site just after 8:30. I smiled when I saw it because Dad was going all out. It would feature 8 pumps for cars and small trucks, with 2 additional pumps for big rigs on the far side. The holes were dug and the blocks were set for the start of the spill containment system in case of tank leaks. The concrete floor needed for steel support was underway. I entered the construction trailer and saw Dad's familiar design, typical of his previous projects, except for the new addition, a 2,400 square foot apartment on top. It made me smile because it showed he recognized the area's potential. After about 2 hours, I drove out to the farm. Bill Robinson came out to greet me, admiring my restored old Ford truck. Those were the days when speed, weight, and tough metal ruled. The missus, as Bill affectionately called her, was just about to serve lunch and insisted I join. She prepared a hearty farmer's meal and was delighted by how much I ate. After the meal, I helped her clean up. While she put away the leftovers, I started washing the dishes. She noticed I wasn't wearing a wedding ring anymore. By the time we finished drying and putting away the dishes, a fresh pot of perked coffee was ready. I spent the next 2 hours filling her in on the events of the last 2 days. Bill mentioned that the girls and their aunt would be welcome here. It would be nice to have some young ones around again. It gave him someone to cook for. I texted Maureen and suggested she come over every Friday night and head home on Sunday. She replied, agreeing to the plan. On Thursday afternoon, I reviewed the disk on my laptop and found it didn't show anyone else's face. Using my cell phone's Wi-Fi link, I sent everything, including Miss Connor's address and phone number, to my father. I instructed him to contact Jace Redding to find out Jack's whereabouts and schedule. I urged him to serve Jack as soon as possible. Marcy could be served at the social services office in town. I also uploaded the video file from the disk. Out of spite, I texted Marcy, claiming I had watched the entire video and found it unremarkable, saying other women had performed better. Maureen worked as a tax specialist, and luckily it was the slowest part of the year. As soon as the girls finished school, they hit the road. Maureen chuckled as they texted their father every 10 to 15 minutes. The 75-mile drive felt short. Upon arriving at the construction site, they sent their final text. Driving down the road, they spotted him waiting at the end of the driveway. Linda and Lauren leaped out of Maureen's car and ran into my arms. Bill and his wife were introduced. I finally learned her name was Betty. The girls loved the room Betty had set up for them. Bill showed everyone their rooms while Betty finished preparing a large dinner. After we ate, I started cleaning up while Betty watched as my daughters and I washed the dishes. Bill told the girls about the large swing set, the swimming pond, and the small motorcycles they could ride with my permission. I had worried about keeping them entertained, but Bill and Betty had everything planned. After the kids went to bed, Maureen and I had a chance to talk. Heath, it's been a crazy couple of days. Everything's fallen apart, Maureen said. It's all coming out now. Jack was the guy she used to sneak out to see when we were growing up. That's how long they've been involved. That explains a lot, I replied. I provided stability and security. Jack represented the wild side she secretly craved. She didn't realize he knew and used it to his advantage. Jack will run off and leave Marcy with nothing she deserves. Mom and Dad talked to child services. If you give them written permission, they'll keep the girls until you find a place, Maureen explained. They also spoke with the kids privately, And afterward, we were all told that due to Marcy's lifestyle, they couldn't recommend she get custody. Maureen saw tears running down my face. It finally hit me. I told her to go, but she refused and stayed with me. Marcy sat at the kitchen table, reflecting on the past 2 days. Thursday had been quiet. Today had been anything but. Jace Redding served her with court papers while she was at work. He was taking her to court to establish whether her daughters were biologically linked to him. To be honest, it had been so many years since the twins were born that she couldn't even recall the details anymore. Heath had warned her that a legal battle was looming, but initially she dismissed it as his anger. What really shook her was Heath's text message to all their friends and family. She had never thought of Jack as her second husband, but legally, as she learned from her lawyer today, he was. Once she moved Jack into her house, they entered into a common-law marriage. Legally, after living together for a year, they had the same rights as a married couple. Heath was likely to succeed in his lawsuit against Jack. That was certain. The only question was how much he would be awarded. The lawyer assured her that Heath would be viewed very favorably in divorce court because he had been wronged for so long. If she had been collecting rent over the last 3 years and could prove it with monthly bank statements, things might have been different. However, there was no evidence that Jack was contributing financially to the household expenses, so the court would likely see him as financially dependent. Just before leaving work, she received a bombshell. Her supervisor called her into the office and explained everything. The previous night, she had visited Mr. and Mrs. Klaus Rubenstein's home after hours regarding a custody issue at their request. They outlined what had happened and sought guidance from the state moving forward. After speaking with the children involved, I informed the grandparents that if they obtained written authorization from the father to care for the kids, we would consider granting them temporary custody until the case is resolved. I understand they are your parents, her supervisor said. Marcy, I can't transfer you right now, but as soon as there's an opening, I will. I'm unable to terminate your employment, but your credibility as a social worker in this area is shot. No one will trust what you say anymore. So you're permanently assigned to office work and must pass your current cases to others, she said with clear disgust. Marcy realized she had no one to blame but herself. It was her decision alone to keep pursuing Jack. Now she was starting to grasp that actions have consequences. Saturday had been a busy day. Linda and Lauren were excited. It was entertaining to hear Bill explain the do's and don'ts of riding the small motorcycles they were standing beside. It was impressive to see how quickly they picked it up. After 2 hours, Bill called it quits for the day, knowing their bodies would ache. Seeing them sweaty, he suggested, "Go jump in the pond for a quick dip." Betty and Maureen were getting closer. Around 4 o'clock, the girls were called in to help prepare part of the dinner. I checked on them because it was new territory for them. The 4 ladies were at the kitchen table, chopping onions for 2 dishes and peeling hot-boiled potatoes for potato salad. Bill fired up his barbecue to grill the steaks he had thawed. I pitched in where I could. We ate the steaks, potato salad, and baked beans outside at the picnic table. It was remarkable that neither the TV nor their cell phones were used all day. It seemed like the twins were discovering a whole new life. It was the girls who decided they wanted to turn in early because they were worn out. The 4 of us enjoyed a few beers while playing cards until we called it a night. On Sunday after lunch, they headed back home. Maureen had a handwritten letter, witnessed by Billy and Betty, giving them the permissions they needed. Klaus Rubenstein called me early Monday morning to express his gratitude for getting the letter back to him quickly. He personally took it to the office, where the supervisor made copies for their records and issued a legal notice confirming their custody of their granddaughters. We discussed the history of his daughter and Jack, and I learned many things I hadn't known before. The following Friday morning, Jake Redding was in Austin, Texas, picking up a load of sterilized medical equipment when he was served. That same morning, Marcy Cummings was served shortly after the social services office opened. Maureen texted me asking for my waist measurements. When I asked why, she replied that it was so we could go swimming in the pond with the kids. I texted back, 34. During an early afternoon walk, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcy. "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I responded, expressing that there was nothing more to discuss since her parents and Maureen had already filled me in on their history, from sneaking out to meet Jack to now. I added that my main question was why she married me if Jack had always been the one. Unsurprisingly, I received no further response. I couldn't tell who was more excited when Maureen arrived with the kids. The 3 of us or the 3 of them. Maureen looked absolutely stunning, her smile contagious. After she hugged me, the girls quietly asked if it would be okay to call us Grandpa and Grandma. I agreed, on the condition that they were comfortable with it. As they went to greet Bill and Betty, Maureen surprised me by kissing me firmly on the lips. I mentioned that she had to hear the girls, so we turned our attention to them. Somehow, Maureen slipped her hand into mine. "We were wondering," Lauren said, "if it would be all right for us to call you Grandpa and Grandma?" Linda added. They agreed immediately, but what touched us was that Betty became emotional. We later found out they never had children because she couldn't conceive. Hearing those words from my daughters was something she never expected in her life. After dinner, I updated Maureen that both Marcy and Jack Redding had been served. Then I showed her Marcy's last message and my response. "My sister can't justify her actions," Maureen remarked. "If she did, she'd have to face the truth about herself." "Let's not dwell on your sister, Maureen," I replied. "When will you find a man who can love you as you deserve?" "Don't be surprised, but I already have," she replied. "My challenge is making him realize it." Bill and I were both up early, enjoying a freshly brewed cup of coffee outside. "Heath, Betty is my second wife," Bill told me. "My first wife, her sister, betrayed me much like Marcy did to you." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Don't let your pain blind you to what's right in front of you. Maureen has been there for you since day one. When you're ready, ask yourself why." That's when it started to dawn on me. Maureen was not just a best friend. Did she want more? And if so, why? "Bill, when did you realize Betty was interested in you?" I asked. "An iron skillet over my head," he chuckled. "After she caught a neighbor girl flirting with me. Since we couldn't have children, we fostered kids for years." Our conversation ended as we heard voices signaling the rest of the household was waking up. After the twins rode the motorcycles for 3 hours, it was time for a swim. We all went down to the pond. Bill and Betty brought down lawn chairs to watch us play with a beach ball for a while. Maureen looked stunning in her white bikini, her auburn hair pulled back behind her ears. Her bare feet caused a slight wiggle in her rear, which I couldn't help but notice as we walked to the pond. Bill had made me see her in a new light. The pond turned out to be deeper than I expected, fed by a small creek with a homemade waterfall from railroad ties. We played beach volleyball, first with one adult and one child, then the girls against us. It was a time filled with laughter, teasing, and pure enjoyment. Just being together felt nice. My daughters took turns diving under me and then being lifted up so they could dive off my shoulders. Eventually, Bill and Betty announced they were starting dinner, and Linda and Lauren went to help. Underwater, I surprised Maureen by flipping her over playfully. She laughed, her hair soaked, and then moved closer to me. As I looked into her eyes, I saw something new. Without a word, I leaned in to kiss her, and our first intimate kiss felt more loving than anything I'd shared with Marcy. "Wow," I exclaimed afterward. "That was intense." Maureen smiled and said softly, "You have no idea how long I've waited for this." She moved closer, and we kissed. We only stopped when Bill called out that dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. Reluctantly, we broke off our kiss and headed back to change for dinner. As soon as we walked into the house, Betty knew exactly what had happened. "Looks like things are falling into place. How did you clue him in?" Betty asked, grinning broadly. "She didn't. I spilled the beans to Heath about your swift moves with the cast iron frying pan," Bill chuckled. The twins overheard and insisted on hearing the story of how Bill and Betty had gotten together. After dinner, once the twins were tucked in bed from the fresh country air wearing them out, I sat on the back porch on a cushioned swing. Maureen joined me, sitting down beside me. I put my arm around her as she leaned against me and said, "Mom figured it out when I brought the twins home last week. To her, I seemed happier than I had in years. I guess my poker face wasn't as good as I thought." "How did she react?" I asked. "There must be a lot of concern given everything that's happening." "She asked if it had come to the point where there was something between us," Maureen said. I honestly told her no. Then she asked how long I'd been in love with you. I said since the summer before you got married. "Wow, that long. And it took all of this for me to realize," I said. "I was expecting a big lecture from her," Maureen continued. "But all she said was if it works out, she'll get Dad to accept it." Then she explained that our dad had been her older sister's reject. She's grateful for that every day. I was kissing Maureen goodbye on Sunday afternoon when Lauren shocked Linda by saying, "Aunt Maureen has been in love with Dad for years. It took what Mom did to him for him to figure it out. If Maureen gets her way, they'll be married as soon as he's divorced." As they drove off, I found myself wondering how my daughter knew. "Heath," Bill said, "let's take a little walk. I have an idea to run by you." We walked off the front of the property, crossed the bridge over the small creek to the other side of the property. There was a nice section of land that had originally been part of the house area. "Wouldn't this be a great spot for a house?" Bill asked. "That way Lauren and Linda could come over any time to ride bikes or horses or whatever they like." "Whose idea was this?" I inquired. "Betty and Maureen's, bright and early this morning," he chuckled. "They're planning to spring the idea on you next week." Klaus called me early Monday morning. Jace Redding had obtained a court order for a DNA test on Lauren and Linda. I had to fill him in on what I knew. He was devastated to hear there was a question about paternity. Until then, he believed Marcy had only been involved with him for the past 3 years. He was so upset by the news that he went to the social services office and publicly disowned his daughter, declaring her dead to him. I spoke with my mother-in-law, who told me that Miss Connor had provided a notarized statement for my lawyer. Jack was due back in town on Wednesday. She asked if I should be around to see what happens. She offered me a place to stay here. I told her I would consider it. I called John Zechsmith and asked if I could stay at his house on Tuesday night. He agreed because he had some things to discuss with me. Bill suggested I take his vehicle so no one would recognize it. I agreed on the condition that he take the truck and treat his wife to a day out on the town. He laughed and said, "You're pretty sharp for a young guy." It was already dusk when I arrived in town. I called John to make sure he was home before pulling into his driveway. It appeared that Marcy had another regular male visitor at the house since I had left. He was there at that moment. Looking through John's binoculars, I immediately recognized him as Jack's older married brother. Jace Redding was surprised when I contacted him. I told him I needed to see him and gave him the address where I was staying. When he arrived, I handed him the key to my house, insisting he needed to see something to believe what I had found out. I informed him that I had discovered who was behind the video of Jack and Marcy, revealing they were currently together in the third-floor bedroom. John and I observed him walking towards my front door. Using the key, he entered. "What do you think he's going to do when he finds out who he is?" John asked. "Jace Redding is a proud man. It all depends on how his pride drives him," I replied. "I just hope it doesn't push him too far." We were in the kitchen when we heard the shot. We feared the worst. John dialed emergency. When the police, fire department, and ambulance arrived, we went outside to watch. John and I couldn't help but laugh. To us, it was surreal to see Marcy half-dressed and Jason, Jack's brother, in handcuffs. Our concern grew when we saw Jace Redding being carried out on a stretcher. John set up the police scanner. We learned that Jace had broken into the third-floor bedroom, and Jason, mistaking him for a burglar, had hit him. Jace was being taken to the hospital with a shoulder injury. Back outside, Marcy, now dressed, noticed me across the street. Her face turned pale. Things had gone from bad to worse for her. "I can't believe it. She was involved with both brothers," John remarked to me. I nodded, admitting I knew there was a third person but wasn't sure who. "I feel sorry for Jace. He doesn't deserve this. No one does." At 6 in the morning on Wednesday, I arrived at my in-laws' place. Klaus Rubenstein was already up, preparing for the day. He greeted me at the door. Over coffee, before anyone else woke up, I told him about what had happened the previous night. Rose, his wife, was surprised to see me but hugged me warmly. Soon after, my daughters came downstairs, dressed and excited to see me. I drove them to school before returning to my in-laws' home. Klaus had left for work. Rose and I had a long conversation about her daughters. We both agreed that Marcy had never truly loved me at all. I visited Jace Redding, who was resting with his wife by his side. When she was introduced to me, she stood up and started to cry as I hugged her. Jace heard me reassuring her not to blame herself for their kids' mistakes. Jace smiled and commented, "Heath has always been calm. I've never seen him lose his temper." "I've come close a few times," I admitted. "I always feared if I lost it, I might end up hurting someone." Jace chuckled. "Jason's in jail. Jack is facing bankruptcy after losing trust. We don't know what Jason's wife will do. It's a real mess. And then there's you. Interested in coming back to management?" I declined, explaining that I had adopted a new outlook on life. Later, I went to the transportation center and watched as Jack signed in and out for the last time. Jace had told me he would be there around 1. It was quite amusing to see him drive off in anger. Knowing his volatile nature, I called John Zechsmith and asked him to keep an eye on my house because I anticipated trouble. Maureen was wrapping up her work for the night when the receptionist entered her office. "There's a good-looking guy asking for you. He's holding a dozen red roses," the receptionist said. "He wants to take you out to dinner." Maureen followed her out, curious about who it could be. If I had any doubts about how Maureen felt, they disappeared when I saw her. The tears welling in her eyes said it all. I followed her to her apartment, and after she parked, we went to Outback for their steak and shrimp special. We enjoyed their blooming onion and had a couple of cocktails. Just as we finished our meal, John called. Jack had gotten home before Marcy and was waiting for her, fueled by the alcohol he'd consumed while waiting. With his father in the hospital, his brother in jail, and having lost his job, he blamed it all on Marcy. He was waiting with a tool in hand when she walked through the door. The neighbor, hearing shots, promptly called the police. Marcy was in critical condition and rushed to the emergency room. John said her prognosis wasn't good. I'd told Maureen, who called her parents. We all met at the hospital. 6 hours later, we received the devastating news that Marcy had passed away during surgery due to severe internal bleeding. I called Bill and his wife to update them on the situation. I also mentioned I'd be returning their vehicle on Friday and picking up my truck. It was tough breaking the news of their mother's death to the twins. Klaus and I decided on a closed casket as we made the arrangements. It was hard to believe that one person's actions could permanently alter 11 lives. It's a reminder that our actions always have consequences, even when we don't realize it. On our way back from the burial, Klaus pulled me aside. "Heath, there's no biological link between Jace Redding and the kids," Klaus said softly. "More importantly, how long has Maureen been in love with you?" "According to your wife, since the summer before Marcy and I got married," I replied. "Did she also tell you that her sister rejected me over 35 years ago?" Klaus added. "I've always been grateful for that. If you and Maureen can make it work, you have my full support." That was the moment I began to rebuild my life. Fast forward 5 years. I watch Linda and Lauren waiting for the bus. My wife, Maureen, keeps busy with our 2 young sons. Bill and Betty have embraced their roles as loving grandparents. Our village has grown around the gas station and convenience store, now even boasting its own post office. In warmer weather, I walk from our house by the pond to work. Jace Redding and his wife visit us often. His eldest son's ex-wife and their children live nearby. Jack received a 10 to 25-year sentence for involuntary manslaughter. Jason's charges were reduced to a misdemeanor. As for the name of our community, it came from Bill, who painted a sign that reads, "We are all here because of circumstances," and placed it at the crossroads.